Today I was hoping to start a new series on the Gospel of Philip. This one, I believe, is going to be a lot like the series I did on the Gospel of Truth. This is a really important gospel for understanding meaning. Um, Other gospels, such as the Gospel of Thomas, there's a lot of riddles and parables and mysterious sayings. The Gospel of Philip is a little bit different because it's more like a book of answers. It's a lot like reading almost a dictionary or a glossary of terms. And it is super helpful in that regard because the terms that you read here, some of these answers and some of these keys and some of these definitions you really just don't get anywhere else, and they're sorely lacking in a lot of other gospels, and this one provides it to you literally in spades. It's just page after page after page of this means this and that means that. So there's a lot of interest in this particular gospel. I know that a lot of people, as soon as I put out the one I did, uh, that it overperformed, at least against my other videos. And so I'm going to give a more extensive treatment of it because there is this interest, and also because it's super important. And it's been something I've been looking at for a long time, trying to really get a grip on it. And I feel like it's something that I can explain at least adequately enough for people out there to sort of take the ball and run with it. The purpose of all of this is to create a movement, if you will, of people who can understand and can explain these things. And this is a tremendous help in this. Now, number one, this is a this is a translation which is available from www.gospels.net. That I thought I had it in my PDF, but anyway, it's in the video. It shows you where to go, but it's a Matheson version. It's available at Gospels.net. There they have a number of public domain gospels and other material that you can use in your works and in things that you might want to create on your end. The idea is here is to create works and to spread this knowledge. This is what the Book of Enoch tells us. These books are for to reveal it to the world. This is the unitary knowledge that it speaks of in the Gospel of Truth. What you find here applies there. It applies across the board. Uses the same keys. It's using the same sort of secret, sort of hidden language, the same images, the same themes, and so on and so forth. And as a kind of a sayings gospel of sorts, again, it differs from Thomas in that it's more answers than it is questions, which is really good, which makes it a good starting point, really, for understanding other gospels. I've broken it down into, I think, a decent sort of study format where, like, the words like this, for example, that are underlined, these aren't actually in the text. These just exist as sort of like, okay, the subject matter under this heading sort of has to do with, in this particular case, Gentiles, Hebrews, and Christians. I've sort of where translations have sort of subdivided these sections into various sayings or whatever. I've sort of highlighted or emboldened the first word to sort of differentiate the first phrase, I guess, in sort of to differentiate where it's bringing up an idea or it's developing an idea that sort of falls under these categories. And so, and then I've further broken them down because the way this is laid out, I wanted to keep ideas together, and I wanted this to be useful as a study tool and as a reference. So, basic psychology 101, people like things broken down into manageable chunks to understand. And so, because some of these sayings are just a couple of sentences long, I've sort of broken them down where I could anyway into chunks so that you would see this sentence here and this sentence here. So as you're casually reading, for example, you follow along, sections stick out in your mind a little bit more. They don't hopefully get lost in all of the text, and that you can kind of understand them better. So I just feel like this makes it a better sort of study material, study guide, a better format for really trying to get the ideas and to see where they lead. And so again, you'll see these different sections broken down into manageable chunks and into different categories. Where I could, I haven't done this perfectly, by the way, but where I could, I've highlighted the words of Jesus in here because there are a few places where you know where he's quoted. So I've tried to make those red. I think I may have missed a couple here or there, but I mean, this is about learning and studying and getting a grasp of things, and so I've done whatever I could to sort of help us out. But anyway, just to get right into it, though, the way it starts out is it talks about uh, the difference between Hebrews and Gentiles and Christians. So it says here, Hebrew creates a Hebrew, and those of this kind are called a proselyte. Okay, but it doesn't say a Hebrew creates a proselyte. It says a Hebrew creates a Hebrew, and in this sense, what he's talking about here is the way in which traditional Judaism will create somebody who is a follower, if you will, of traditional Judaism. The fleshly level understanding, in other words, do this, don't do that, follow this law, don't follow this law. So he's trying to differentiate. A Hebrew is a Hebrew is a Hebrew is a Hebrew is a Hebrew. The idea of a proselyte or something, you're talking about somebody who's been made a Hebrew, right? But a proselyte isn't somebody who really exists, so to speak. They are, and they create others like them. In other words, they are Hebrews and they create other Hebrews. But here comes the differentiation. For others, it is good enough for them that they come into being. So before we move on, what is this coming into being? And one of the things that I've said many times in many other works, and hopefully you will discern in the text here, is that coming into being is something very different from becoming a convert or becoming a proselyte, so to speak. The coming into being is something different. That is an awakening inside. That is coming to yourself, finding yourself in God, and hence finding God within you. And this is one of the themes that it goes into in much, much greater depth. But the way that you come into being, literally, and anybody who's followed, again, my teaching for any length of time will understand sort of instinctively that there's a difference between the surface level understanding and the spiritual understanding, the spiritual intuition that goes into reading things spiritually. Um, I'm not trying to create a religion at all. I'm trying to acquaint people with a higher level of understanding so that they can come to the realization of their divine and angelic natures. And this is something that's facilitated by these books. It's definitely the intention of God that we unite with him and with his truth and with his teaching. But that can only happen in reality when you come to terms with the higher level meaning. If you're caught in the surface level meaning of things, if you're caught in the flesh and blood level of things, you're missing out on the higher level. You're missing out on the spiritual level. And that's a dead state. Um, to come alive, to really come alive, is to understand that there's an ambiguity, so to speak, in the scriptures, where if you look at them one way, you see them as flesh and blood. And if you allow them to come alive in you, if you allow them to awaken your spiritual ears and your spiritual eyes, your spiritual hearing, your spiritual seeing, in other words, then you see it. And once you see it, then you acquire, so to speak, spiritual eyes. And once you hear it, you acquire, as it were, spiritual ears. And that is the coming into being. That is the transformation. It isn't a superficial translation where you join a church or you join a synagogue or you join a whatever and you become like everybody else. This is fundamentally different. This is finding something divine. So let's come to the next term. The slave, or some translations use the word servant, seeks only freedom. They don't seek their master's property. But the son isn't just a son. He claims the father's inheritance for himself. Those who inherit the dead are themselves dead, and they inherit the dead. Again, a Hebrew creates a Hebrew. If you just join a religion of any sort, again, these people, if they don't have the spiritual eyes, they don't have the spiritual ears, they are spiritually dead. And so this is what this is referring to. Life and death have to do with understanding or not understanding. And later on in the text, you'll see that this gives you definitions of these terms. The slave is somebody who is ignorant. In other words, they're a slave to ignorance. They don't know, and so they act upon false knowledge. And so, in effect, they are a slave to false knowledge. They're a slave, if you will, a servant to bad information. And it's sort of like garbage in, garbage out. If all you know is what's on the surface, if all you understand is what you were taught, again, by those who were spiritually dead, then you can only be dead. You're just another Hebrew, so to speak. But what is the inheritance? The inheritance is something different. There are two basic inheritances that we get. One is the coming of the Son. See, the first testament given to Moses and to others, of course, was the Old Testament as we speak. And in that Old Testament, so to speak, there was the revelation of a future coming of a Messiah, the Son, if you will, of God. So it's a bit like thinking, well, the Old Testament gives birth or fathers, if you will, another testament. Another testament is born from the first testament, and there's a subsequent one to that. There are three revelations in total. We have the first two. When Jesus was walking with those people on the road to Emmaus, he talked about how the scriptures, as he said, the Psalms and all the prophets or whatever spoke about him. So when he came alive, he was the fulfillment of that. And so, in effect, that was his inheritance. He inherited that title. He inherited that role, if you will, which, of course, as we'll read later, he basically created for himself. But if you're just picking up on Christianity or Judaism, those people spiritually do not understand the mysteries and therefore are spiritually dead. And so this is what being alive and being dead referred to. It's the same as in the Gospel of Thomas. Whoever comes to understand the meaning of these words will not taste of death. Why? Because they will be spiritually alive. And that's the same throughout all the scriptures. When Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead, what he means is that the spiritually dead are going to bury others. In other words, what does it mean to bury? It means to cover them with the earth, right? So in other words, earth, they're covered with an earthly understanding. They understand on the superficial flesh and blood level. Those who inherit the living, however, are themselves alive, and they inherit both the living and the dead. The reason why that's true is because, again, you understand the lower as well as the upper. So you're not just stuck in the lower level meaning. You have inherited, if you will, life. You have inherited the higher level meaning. You have discerned that in the scriptures. And again, as we'll later find out, that leads to a state of being spiritually alive. The dead cannot inherit anything because how can the dead inherit? So again, on the level of the flesh, that's pretty obvious because obviously if you're dead, what good is an inheritance? You're getting eaten by worms or something. But he's talking about the spiritually dead. The spiritually dead here cannot inherit because, again, if they were to inherit, they wouldn't be dead anymore. They would be alive at that point. And that's what it goes on to explain. If the dead inherits the living, right, then they're no longer dead, but they are alive. So it says if the dead inherits the living, in other words, if they come to understand things with their spiritual eyes, their spiritual ears, their spiritual hearts, and their spiritual minds, they will no longer exist in a state of death, and the truth and the knowledge and the understanding cannot be taken from them. In the same way that once you see an illusion, for example, once you see through something that's deceptive, once you see through a lie, once you see through death, once you see through anything, you can't unsee it. And so the dead, if you will, come alive and they live even more. And why is that? Because, again, here they thought that what they understood before was right. They were convinced of it, right? But now, if they come alive, it's like, wow, now I've shifted paradigms. Now all the stuff that I thought was true, now I realize that this other is even more true. Now, then it goes on to explain about the Gentiles. A Gentile doesn't die because they've never lived in order that they may die. In other words, again, they won't die a spiritual death because you have to have had the spiritual life, if you will, in order to die, if you will, the spiritual death. But because they're Gentiles, they're outsiders, they don't have the mystery. They're not part of the um, in the time frame in which they live, their physical life or whatever. They don't exist in a milieu of truth. They don't exist where the truth is changing them or whatever. So in other words, they're already in a dead state. So it would be like, how would you die further than you're already dead, I guess. Whoever has believed in the truth has lived. So in other words, believing in the truth is associated with life. Not believing in the truth, again, just reinforcing the same idea. And you'll see a lot of this too. And he goes on to even explain that. You explain the one through the many, and it's a lot of just saying the same things over and over and over again. So the good news is that once you get it, you get it. So whoever has believed in the truth has lived, right? Because coming to know the spiritual truth is finding life, and is at risk of dying because they're alive since the day Christ came. And again, we'll get into that too. Christ is a revealed name, is one of the things it goes on to explain later. And in all the Understanding Paul videos that I did years ago, you can find them on my channel. I talked about how Jesus was the name that was given to him at his circumcision, and it represents him in the flesh. And Christ, when Peter says, "Oh, well, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God," Jesus explicitly tells him, "Well, flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father, which is in heaven." So the contrast here is between flesh and blood understanding and that which is revealed by the Father, which is Christ. So again, so once they understand the Christ level, once they understand the higher level, they become alive. So in other words, since Christ came to them, or once they realize the higher level, Christ level understanding. The world is created, the city's gentrified, and the dead carried out. Well, again, the world is worldly, it is fleshly. People adorn the so-called cities, and or you might think parenthetically the institutions, the just everything that's associated with the world is adorned, gentrified. In other words, it's built up and it's beautified, and it's Babylon or something. It's just the idea that it's built up and it's glorified, and the dead carried out, because again, many people in that situation are spiritually dead. When we were Hebrews, we were fatherless. We had only a mother. So what he's saying here is that when we followed religion, when we were following the rules, do this, don't do this, right? These books are in, those books are out. When they were following the laws, the codes, the whatever, they didn't have the Father. Why? Because they hadn't become alive. They haven't received, if you will, the inheritance. They received at that point the designation of the Son, because again, they had been born by the Father. Again, they were engendered or fathered, if you will, by this understanding. And they had only our mother. And again, this is lowercase. When Paul talks about how he was converted, he was taken from his mother, which he was speaking of symbolically as Judaism. So again, they only had Judaism. They were only Hebrews, either by way of conversion or by way of birth. But when we became Christians, we gained both father and mother. Again, this is a spiritual father and a spiritual mother. Again, his definition of Christian is somebody who understands the truth, who understands the meaning, who can read, who can use the images and the keys and the codes or whatever to discern spiritual truth. So they become, in a sense, engendered. They become sons and daughters, if you will, of the spiritual Father that engenders us. Okay, so the next section is life, death, light, and darkness. Those who sow in winter reap in the summer. The winter is this world. The summer is the other age, or the age to come, or the age that is above, if you will, and beyond the age that we speak of as being this world, this time. Let's sow in the world so that we may reap in the summer. Again, you see the the leaves spring forth, you know that summer is nigh. You know that the other age is nigh, in other words. So this, again, this is like a really great resource because, again, it's a dictionary. It explains all that mysterious stuff. And this is a great example of this. Because of this, it is not right for us to pray in the winter. The summer follows the winter. But if someone reaps in the winter, they won't reap, but they will uproot. Why? Because the plant is planted to be reaped at a certain time. And until it's that time, it won't be ripe. I mean, it takes the time to grow, it takes the time to be nourished, and it takes time for it to actually bring forth its fruit. And the fruit is the understanding. Because again, everything is buried, if you will, in the earth. That's what sowing means. You put it under the earth. In other words, you sow it by covering it in earthly terminology. Reaping it is by the eating of the fruit that it produces because it was sown in the world. And again, this is another one of those paradigms here: the earth and the heavens, the earthly and the heavenly, that which is below and that which is above. So you sow things like parables are sown, if you will, to be understood in retrospect. So until you get to that point where everything is fulfilled, all of the prophecies and whatever are fulfilled, then it isn't time to reap. But now, since we've entered the seventh spiritual day, or the seventh millennium, or whatever, the spiritual Sabbath, as it speaks of in the Epistle of Barnabas, for example, again, because this is a unitary knowledge, you take and apply it all the way across the board. Since we are in that seventh day biblically, now it is time to reap. Now it is time to pray. Now it is no longer winter, but summer. And again, at the wrong season, no crop is yours. Even on the days of the Sabbath, the field is barren. And it's kind of important here. It talks about the Sabbath days because, again, there's only one true spiritual Sabbath day, which occurs during the millennium. But these days are sort of lowercase days. These have to do with the Sabbaths as we understand them. Christ came to buy some, but to save others, and to redeem yet others. He bought those who were strangers, made them his own, and set them apart as a pledge, as he wanted to. It wasn't just when he appeared that he laid down his life when he wanted to, but since the day the world came into being, he laid down his life when he wanted to. So let's look at this really quick. Again, when he says Christ, he's talking about the revealed name. In other words, Jesus represents him concealed. That's him in the flesh. All things are hidden in Christ. So Christ is a revealed name. That is to say, once you come to recognize everything which is hidden, then the Christ that is within you, that is to say, him within you. Because again, he wants to unite with you. Even in the Gospel of Thomas, it says that he will become you. The idea is that you become spiritually awake and your heart opens up, your mind opens up, your eyes open up, your spirit opens up, everything opens up inside of you, and the mysteries are revealed to you. So he came to buy some, to save others, and to redeem yet others. So some were Jews at the time, and they basically were converts, if you will. I shouldn't say converts. That's kind of the opposite. They were spiritually awakened by him. And so he purchased them. To save others, again, in the gospel of truth, he's called the Savior because that is the work that he did to save those, that is the work that he is going to perform. So this has to do with the people who are in the Christian age who live in the middle and the interim. And the redemption is at the end, where we're on the spiritual Sabbath day, that is to say in the seventh millennium, when all the mysteries are going to be revealed to us, and we will finally be redeemed, if you will. He bought those who were strangers and made them his own and set them apart as a pledge, as he wanted to. In other words, he showed them the Father, and they were no longer strangers, but they were intimate with the knowledge. He had changed them. He made them his own, in other words. He brought them to be to the same page that he was on, in other words, and he set them apart. He sanctified them as a pledge. That is to say, a pledge is something that you place down for something in the future. So again, these were the people who knew the mystery at the beginning, and this was what he wanted to do. He wanted to create a sort of first fruits out of the early Christians, give them the mystery, reveal to them the Father. In other words, give them their spiritual inheritance, make them spiritual sons, spiritually to engender them through the knowledge and through the mystery of the scriptures, to give them the keys, to give them the insights, to show them the images and so forth that were laid down before. And it wasn't just a consequence of his birth. It wasn't just when he appeared, in other words, either when he was born or when he began preaching, that he's like, I should maybe lay down my life or whatever. No, it was from the day that the world came into being. In other words, he was the lamb slain from the foundation of the world, like we read in the book of Revelation. So it wasn't just that he was some human that came along, and figured this stuff out or whatever, and saw that that's what he had to do or whatever to fulfill the scriptures. He knew from before the world began really what he wanted to do, and his timing when he wanted to do this, right, was at a particular time and place and in a particular way. Then he came first to take it, since it had been pledged. It was dominated by the robbers that had captured it, but he saved it. And all those who were good in the world, he redeemed, again, at the time of redemption, as well as those who were bad. So again, he came first to take it since it had been pledged. In other words, it had been spoken of before that he would be the Savior and that he would save mankind. And so that was the pledge. And he took his role. He took on that book as it speaks. It took on that responsibility, if you will, to shed his blood in the flesh. And then it was dominated by the robbers that had captured it. And again, the robbers are those people who rob us of the truth, like the scribes and the Pharisees and the lawyers who take the keys of knowledge and hide them so that they neither enter nor can anyone else. They rob us of our spiritual knowledge. They rob us of our spiritual place. And those are they who are of the interim and who existed at the beginning to martyr and to destroy all of the knowledge of the first people who he had anointed, the people that he made his own, in other words, at the beginning. Those whom he had sanctified as a pledge, if you will. They were the ones who wrote down this knowledge. They were the ones who encoded it for us in prospect to be understood in retrospect. And then finally, the part about the redemption here, the third stage, is after the time of the middle, the time of the interim, and that those who were good in the world, he redeemed, right? So who are these people? These are the good soil people, right? These are the people who the seed grew in and produced much fruit, right? These are the people who existed at the end, at the time of the redemption, right? To reveal it to the world, those who are good and as well as those who are bad. In other words, anyone who hears the sound of this voice, in other words, who understands the secret language or whatever, whether you're good or whether you're bad, if you have the truth in you, you'll recognize it if you are one of the good. And even if you are one of the bad, because there are those who are good, you will be exposed to it as well. So the light and the darkness, the right and the left, are brothers of each other. They're inseparable. So those who are good aren't good. Those who are bad aren't bad. Nor is life really life, nor is death really death. Because of this, each one will be dissolved into its origin from the beginning. But those who are exalted above the world are indissoluble and eternal. So again, the contrast here is between those who are above the world or exalted above the world are different from those who are involved in the things of the world. The reason why the people who are involved kind of in the slings and the arrows and the sort of the politics or whatever of the world and the things of the world, among them, those who are good aren't really good. And those who are bad aren't really bad. Nor is life really life, nor is death really death. And so What does that mean? Okay, the good by themselves are made better by the bad who are in the world. Um, what does that mean? Well, if you're a good person, whatever, how do I know that you're a good person unless you're tried and proven by things or by people in the world? Unless you're put through trials and tribulations by others, unless you maybe are abused by the bad, or unless you're maybe, um, unless you're proven, in other words, you're not really good. So until you go through this life and you have to suffer the slings and arrows of bad people, and unless you walk in the darkness, for example, you can never see the light. So as long as you're just, let's say, a Hebrew, or just, let's say, a Gentile, or even if you're, as he puts it, a Christian, the one who has the Christ level of understanding, let's say, um, you can't you can't really be purified unless there is some trial or temptation or torture or hardship or something that you have to go through. So even that which we define as bad, if it makes you a better person, isn't truly bad. And even if you are a genuinely good person, unless you're good when push comes to shove or whatever, you aren't really good. And so each one will be dissolved into its origin from the beginning, because again, this is the trial, this is the testing, this is the purification. Uh, if you're bad, truly bad, uh, eventually your life will show it, and you'll eventually turn into something that's really bad. And if you're good and life puts you through it, you'll turn into someone who is basically better. But above all of those is the one who understands. Those who are above the world, right, are indissoluble and they're eternal because they're of a different nature. They defy categorization. They are transcendent of this world. They're not caught up in the goings on and whatnot in the world, as Jesus puts it in the Gospel of Thomas. They exist maybe as passers-by, without involvement, and they don't subject themselves uh, to the things of this world. They're looking for a better place. They're looking for the inheritance.